A cop slapped Bud Spencer, then shoved a gun into his chest. One move from Bud could have ended everything, but what he did instead shocked the entire street. San Francisco, 1972. North Beach, the beating heart of the Italian community that everyone still affectionately called Little Italy. The morning fog hung low and lazy over the bay like a thick wool blanket someone had forgotten to fold away, turning the streets into a soft, grey dream until the sun finally decided to punch through and burn it off around 10 o'clock. Before noon on this ordinary weekday, something raw, electric, and utterly unforgettable was about to explode right there on Columbus Avenue, right in the middle of the neighborhood's daily pulse. No one who stood witness to it, whether they were leaning out a second-story window, sipping espresso at a sidewalk cafe, or just hurrying past with a loaf of fresh bread under their arm, would ever shake the memory from their bones. It would become the kind of story passed around dinner tables for decades, whispered in corner bars, retold to wide-eyed grandkids, and eventually turned into the stuff of local legend. The day the gentle giant from the movies showed the whole block what real strength looked like, when it chose not to destroy everything in its path. North Beach didn't feel like it belonged to the rest of San Francisco the way the polished neighborhoods up on Nob Hill or the sleek new high-rises downtown did. No, this stretch of colorful storefronts, narrow alleys, and sun-bleached sidewalks belonged heart and soul to the people who lived inside it. The grandmothers hanging laundry from rickety fire escapes while singing old Neapolitan songs, the old men arguing passionately over espresso and bocce balls in the park, the kids dodging between parked cars chasing a worn-out soccer ball that looked older than half the buildings on the block. Its borders weren't cold lines drawn on any official city map by some distant bureaucrat. They lived and breathed in the everyday things, the heavy smell of fresh garlic and simmering tomato sauce drifting from open kitchen windows at all hours, the rapid-fire mix of Italian and broken English shouted across the street in friendly insults, the unspoken code that if one of your own got pushed around by an outsider, the whole block felt it in their chest like a shared heartbeat. Every single morning followed the same warm, familiar rhythm that made the place feel less like a neighborhood and more like one giant, extended family. Vendors rolled up the metal gates of their small family-run groceries and bakeries with creaky, work-hardened hands that had done the exact same motion for 30 or 40 years. Restaurant doors swung wide open, releasing thick clouds of steam heavy with the rich, mouth-watering scent of pasta water boiling over, roasted meats turning golden in the ovens, and fresh basil torn by hand, the kind of aroma that could make a grown man stop in his tracks and remember his grandmother's kitchen back in the old country. Elderly men eased themselves onto wooden chairs outside the cafes, not just to rest their tired legs from a lifetime of hard labor, but to quietly remind themselves and everybody else who walked by that this corner of America was still theirs to claim, still theirs to protect, still theirs to love fiercely. In North Beach, survival wasn't some dusty, romantic chapter from the old country stories told late at night over grappa. It was the daily grind, the way you got through every single day without letting the big, indifferent city grind you down first. You worked hard, you looked out for your neighbors, and you kept your head up even when the world tried to push it down. And on this particular morning in 1972, everything felt exactly the same, calm, steady, familiar as the smell of fresh espresso bubbling in the mocha pot. The newspaper boys were shouting headlines about Nixon and the war winding down. The butchers were sharpening their knives with rhythmic scrapes, and the radio from the open windows played Dean Martin crooning about love and luck. But right underneath that calm surface, there was always that low, humming tension, the kind that never really leaves a tight-knit immigrant neighborhood like this one. It was the kind of tension you learned to carry deep in your chest without ever letting it show on your face, because the people here had figured out something the rest of San Francisco never quite understood. You don't sit around waiting for trouble to knock politely on your door. You walk around expecting it, ready for it in your bones, even while you pray every day that it stays far away on the other side of the bay. Bud Spencer, born Carlo Pedicoli in Naples, Italy, back in 1929, moved through those streets the same way he moved through life. Big as a freight train rolling down the tracks, solid as the rugged hills of his homeland, and completely at ease with the kind of quiet, effortless power that made strangers step aside without him ever having to say a single word. At 6'4" and built like a heavyweight boxer who could have easily been a professional athlete if life had taken a different turn, Bud wasn't the flashy, showy type. He didn't need fancy footwork or dramatic spins. He was the gentle giant, the man whose massive hands could throw a punch that looked like it could knock down a brick wall on the movie screen, but who would rather buy the whole bar a round of drinks afterward and laugh about it over a plate of spaghetti. That morning, he was in San Francisco for a short break between film shoots back in Europe, where his latest wild buddy cop pictures with his crazy, fast-talking partner Terence Hill were selling out theaters from Rome to Milan and even starting to catch on in a few American drive-ins. The two of them had become legends across the ocean, with their over-the-top action comedies, Bud playing the big, lovable strongman who solved problems with one well-placed slap, or a bear hug that left bad guys seeing stars. Here in North Beach, though, he was just another big Italian guy taking a slow walk to clear his head, soaking in the familiar sounds and smells that reminded him so much of home in Naples. The act of moving itself, those long, powerful strides that made the sidewalk feel a little smaller under his boots, was purpose enough for him, no destination necessary. For nearly 40 minutes, nothing broke the easy, comforting rhythm of the neighborhood, just the quiet endurance of North Beach, a community that had been leaned on by hard times, by suspicious cops, by city inspectors who sometimes looked at Italian names like they were problems instead of people, too many times to ever completely drop its guard. Old ladies waved at him from their windows as he passed, recognizing the big man from the movie posters they had pinned up in their living rooms. "Bud! Carlo! Come eat later!" one shouted, and Bud gave them that trademark half grin, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and a simple nod that said louder than any words, "I'm one of you, always will be." Then he rounded the corner onto a narrower side street, lined with small family shops, and spotted something that didn't fit the warm morning light at all. An elderly man, a police officer, and a scene that had played out on these very blocks way too many times before, like a bad record skipping on the same painful note. Officer Davis was a stocky, red-faced cop in his mid-30s, with a permanent scowl etched into his features and a badge that seemed to weigh heavier on his ego than on the fabric of his uniform. He stood looming over Mr. Giuseppe Rossi, a 73-year-old Italian immigrant whose hands were scarred and gnarled from decades of real, honest work. Mr. Rossi had poured more than 30 hard years into building his little corner grocery, Rossi and Sons, right there on that street. It was a neighborhood landmark. Shelves packed floor to ceiling with imported olive oil, giant wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano that the old man aged himself with loving care, and a wooden counter where he still sliced paper-thin prosciutto by hand for the old-timers who came in every single morning for their usual. The shop smelled like home garlic, basil, aged cheese, and the faint sweetness of cannoli shells frying in the back. In the space of just a few seconds, that hard-earned dignity was getting shoved around like it was worthless junk. A wooden crate of empty milk bottles had been left a little too close to the curb after the morning delivery. Nothing blocking the sidewalk, just an old man's careful habit after unloading supplies from the truck. Officer Davis had apparently decided that today was the day he would make an example out of the old wop and his mess. "Move the damn crate, Rossi, or I swear I'll write you up for obstruction right now," Davis barked, his voice loud and sharp enough to carry halfway down the block. He planted his heavy boot on the edge of the crate and gave it a rough, deliberate nudge. Not a full kick, but hard enough to make the glass bottles clink and rattle dangerously inside, threatening to tip over and shatter on the pavement. This ain't the old country where you can just leave your junk wherever the hell you feel like it. This is America, my streets, my rules. You understand me, old man? Mr. Rossi, bent slightly with age but still carrying the quiet pride of a man who had crossed an ocean with nothing but a suitcase and a dream, kept his eyes lowered respectfully on the ground. The way he had learned long ago was sometimes the only safe response. His thick white hair caught the morning light, and his hands, those hands that had built a life from scratch, trembled just a fraction as he answered in a soft, accented voice. "Officer, per favore, I just unloaded the delivery 2 minutes ago. Give me 2 minutes, and I take it inside. It's not blocking anybody, I promise. Please, it's my livelihood. My son helps me on weekends, but today I'm alone." Davis let out a short, mean laugh that had no warmth in it at all. "Per favor, you people, and your per favor this and grazie that. I've told you before, Rossi. Last month it was the same damn thing with the sidewalk display. Next time it's a ticket. Or maybe I haul your old ass down to the station for resisting a lawful order. How's that sound to you, huh? You want to spend the afternoon explaining to your wife why Grandpa's in jail again?" The old man's shoulders slumped just a fraction more, but he stayed silent after that, the humiliation settling heavy on him like the fog that had only just lifted. He already knew exactly how this always ended, with nothing changing, with the same quiet shame that had followed so many immigrant families from the docks of Ellis Island to these sunlit streets. A small crowd was beginning to gather at a respectful distance now. 2 housewives clutching shopping bags filled with fresh vegetables, a couple of young mechanics from the auto shop down the block wiping grease from their hands, and a handful of kids peeking out from behind a parked Ford, their eyes wide with the kind of innocent curiosity that children have when they sense grown-up trouble brewing. Nobody stepped forward yet. Not yet. The air felt thicker, heavier, charged with that familiar tension everyone in North Beach knew too well. Bud Spencer watched the entire ugly scene from the corner, his massive arms crossed over his broad chest, his face calm on the surface, but his dark eyes narrowing with that slow-burning fire he had carried since his days as an Olympic swimmer back in the 1950s. Inside, the familiar instinct was stirring the same raw power that had made him a star in those wild European action pictures where he and Terence Hill turned barroom brawls into comedy gold. He could feel the weight of every eye on the street slowly turning toward him now, the whispers starting, "Is that him?" The big one from the movies. But Bud stayed rooted right where he was for a long, deliberate moment, his boots planted like ancient tree trunks on the sidewalk. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world for a man built like him, a man who could lift a car if he really wanted to, was to do absolutely nothing at all. He had learned that lesson the hard way on film sets and in real life. Real strength wasn't always about swinging first or proving you were the toughest guy in the room. What he saw burned low in his gut like bad espresso, though, and it didn't fade when he finally turned and kept walking slowly down the block. It stuck with him, clinging like the smell of garlic on your fingers, and 4 minutes later that same ugly moment came looking for him like it had unfinished business. At the intersection of Columbus and Green Street, Officer Davis spotted the big man again. Something about the way Bud carried himself instantly got under the cop's skin, like an itch he couldn't scratch. It wasn't anything Bud was actively doing, he was just standing there waiting for the light to change, tall and broad-shouldered, calm as a summer afternoon on the bay, like the whole neighborhood was his backyard and he belonged there more than anyone. To a guy like Davis, that kind of easy, unshakable confidence from a big Italian man wasn't normal. It was a direct challenge to the natural order of things as he saw it. So he crossed the street with the same arrogant swagger and the same tired routine he had run dozens of times before, nightstick swinging at his hip like a threat, except this time he had picked the wrong fella by about 1.5 miles. "Hey, big guy," Davis called out, voice sharp and commanding as he closed the distance. "Yeah, you the giant over there. Stop right where you are. Don't move. Let me see some identification. Now." Bud turned slow and deliberate, his massive frame shifting like a ship coming about in the harbor. He didn't argue or puff up his chest or make any kind of fuss. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his jacket with one huge hand, and pulled out his passport and California driver's license, handing them over nice and easy, because he understood something most hot-blooded young men never figured out in their entire lives. Not every single fight needed to be won with fists or loud words. "Here you go, officer," Bud said, in that deep, rumbling voice with the thick Italian accent that had made him famous on screens from Rome to Rio. The voice carried weight, like distant thunder over the hills. "Name's Carlo Pedasoli, but everybody calls me Bud Spencer these days. I'm just taking a quiet walk, enjoying the morning. Anything I can help you with? You seem a little worked up." Davis snatched the documents like they were stolen goods and studied them under the brim of his hat, like he was examining evidence in a murder case. His eyes flicked back and forth, not hunting for the truth but desperately searching for any excuse he could latch onto to justify the power trip he was already on. "Spencer, huh? Sounds like a made-up movie name to me. You one of those tough guy actor types? Think you're some kind of hero because you play pretend fights on camera for the Italians back home? Big whop like you walking around my streets like you own the whole damn block. You people think you can just sail over here, open your little shops and do whatever the hell you want without answering to anybody?" Bud's face didn't twist into anger right away, but those who knew him well, like Terence Hill on set, would have recognized the subtle shift, the cool, controlled look of a man who knew in his bones that he could end the entire conversation with one well-placed backhand if he chose to. Instead, his voice stayed low and even. "I'm just a guy from Naples taking a walk in a neighborhood that feels like home, officer. Same as anybody else. No trouble here. I saw what happened back there with Mr. Rossi. That crate wasn't hurting anybody. He's an old man who's worked his whole life to keep that store open for the community. You shouldn't talk to people like that, especially not someone who's given so much to this block." The usual ugly words came spilling out of Davis anyway, phrases loaded with years of resentment and old grudges aimed at the immigrant families who had built North Beach brick by brick, business by business. "No trouble? You all cause trouble just by breathing the same air. Move along, or I'll find a reason to take you in right now. Maybe that big mouth of yours needs a real lesson in how things work around here. You think those silly movies make you untouchable? I'll show you untouchable." This time, Bud Spencer didn't just swallow it, the way so many others on the street had learned to do over the years to keep the peace. His expression hardened, not flaring up into wild, uncontrolled anger, not yet, but into something cooler, something held tightly in check by a man who had faced down far bigger threats than one angry cop with a badge and a bad attitude. "You shouldn't talk to people like that," Bud repeated, voice still calm, but now carrying a deeper edge that made the air around them feel heavier. "Especially not an old man like Mr. Rossi, who's worked harder in one single day than you have in your whole career. He didn't do anything wrong. That crate is how he feeds his family and half the neighborhood. Show a little respect, officer. It doesn't cost you anything." Davis read the whole situation completely wrong, the way bullies often do when they're used to winning without a real fight. He saw what he wanted to see. Weakness, maybe even fear, hidden behind the big man's size. He figured the giant was backing down, just like everybody else always did. So he did what he always did when he thought he had the upper hand. He pushed it one dangerous step further, stepping right into Bud's personal space until the smell of cheap coffee, cigarettes, and stale sweat was unmistakable. "Respect? From you? I'll show you what respect looks like." His hand shot out quick and casual, the open palm smacking Bud hard across the face with a loud, stinging crack that echoed off the brick buildings like a gunshot in the quiet morning. Not enough to really hurt a man built like a human fortress, but loud enough and sharp enough for the entire block to hear it and feel it in their chests. Two kids froze instantly in a nearby doorway, their eyes wide as dinner plates. Faces began appearing silently in windows overhead, curtains yanked back, people leaning out with mouths open. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the growing crowd that had followed at a safe distance. Everybody in North Beach knew what usually came next after a sound like that. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nobody ever fought back because the consequences were too high. the system too stacked. But this time, everything felt different, charged with something electric and new. Bud Spencer didn't react like the rest of them. He didn't step back. He didn't drop his eyes to the ground in defeat. He didn't shrink away or disappear into the crowd. He just planted his massive feet like twin oak trees and stood there, rubbing his jaw once slowly with one enormous hand, while the red mark from the slap faded almost as quickly as it had appeared. "That was a mistake, friend," Bud said quietly, his voice still steady but now carrying the low rumble of a storm about to break. "A big one. You just hit me, in front of everybody, in front of the kids. You really want to do this? Because I could flatten you right here and now. One hit, and you'd be picking yourself up off the pavement wondering what kind of train just ran you over. But I'm not that kind of man. Not anymore. Not today." Davis laughed again, but this time it sounded forced, a little shaky at the edges. "What, you gonna fight a cop now, big shot? Go ahead. Swing at me. Give me a reason to put you down for good. You think those dumb movies make you tough? I've seen tougher guys than you cry like babies when the real world hits them. You're nothing but a washed-up actor playing pretend. This is my street, my badge, my rules." Bud's hand started to come up slowly, big, heavy, and deliberate, the kind of hand that had thrown punches in films that looked like they could knock out a charging bull. The crowd held its collective breath, the tension so thick you could have cut it with one of Mr. Rossi's prosciutto knives. Inside Bud's mind flashed quick memories. The Olympic pool in Helsinki, where he had competed as a young swimmer, pushing his body to the limit without ever giving up. The film sets in Spain, where he and Terence Hill had turned fake fights into art, always knowing when to pull the punch at the last second. The lessons his father had taught him back in Naples about honor and restraint. He could end this right now. One solid, open-handed slap, the kind that had become his trademark on screen, and Davis would be eating sidewalk while the whole neighborhood cheered. But then his eyes caught something nobody else in the chaos seemed to be paying full attention to. Those two kids still standing frozen in the doorway, still staring with a mix of fear and desperate hope in their young eyes. They were watching, really watching, like the whole future of the block hung on what the big man would do next. In that single heartbeat, the entire confrontation ended before it ever really began. Slowly, deliberately, Bud moved his massive hands behind his back, fingers laced together tight, not surrendering to Davis but choosing control over chaos. "I could do it," Bud said evenly, looking the cop dead in the eye without blinking. "I could slap you so hard your grandchildren would feel it. But I'm not going to. Not in front of those kids. Not over a stupid crate and your bad attitude. Walk away, officer. Let it go. Go write your ticket on somebody who actually deserves it. Mr. Rossi is a good man. Leave him and his store alone. That's the right thing." Of course, Davis misread the whole thing again, the way small men with big egos always do. He thought he had won the standoff. His face twisted into a triumphant sneer as he reached for the radio clipped to his belt. "Smart choice, tough guy. Hands behind your back, good boy. You're learning." The radio crackled to life as he called it in, voice full of false bravado. "Unit 47, I got a 10 to 15 on Columbus and Green. Big suspect. Possible resisting arrest. Send backup now. He's a big one, might need extra hands." He didn't realize yet that the moment wasn't finished at all. It had only changed shape, and the whole neighborhood was watching, whispering the name like a prayer or a warning. It's Bud Spencer, the movie star, the big Italian who never backs down, but never starts trouble either. 6 long minutes ticked by like hours, while the crowd grew larger and the murmurs spread like wildfire through the side streets. Then another officer arrived, Officer Williams, an Italian-American cop who had actually grown up just 2 blocks over on Filbert Street and still came back every Sunday for his mother's famous lasagna and Sunday sauce. He stepped onto the scene expecting just another everyday stop, another routine power play by Davis. But what he saw wasn't everyday at all. Davis standing there with his service weapon drawn and pointed at a huge man who stood perfectly still with his hands behind his back, Calm as a summer afternoon on the bay, way too calm for someone staring down the barrel of a gun. Williams paused mid-step, because that kind of stillness didn't look like fear or defeat or even submission. It looked like pure iron control from somebody who could have ended the entire situation in a heartbeat if he had felt like it. Recognition hit Williams piece by piece, then all at once like a hammer to the chest. He stepped closer, took another long look at the giant frame, the familiar strong jaw, the calm eyes, and quietly asked, voice low but urgent, "Do you even know who this is, Davis?" Davis frowned, still confused and irritated, sweat beading on his forehead now. Some big-mouth actor playing tough on camera. "What's it to you, Williams? I got this under control. He's coming in for questioning." Williams leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping even lower so only Davis could hear. "That's Bud Spencer, Carlo Pedasoli, the guy from They Call Me Trinity, the big one, who fights like a bull on screen but always does the right thing off camera. You just slapped Bud Spencer in front of half of North Beach. Lower the gun right now, Davis. Holster it. This is over. You just made the biggest mistake of your career." Davis's confidence cracked wide open like thin ice on a winter pond and then crumbled completely. The color drained from his face as the name finally sank in deep. The late-night TV movies he had watched himself, the stories he had heard about the gentle giant Italian star who never looked for fights but never lost one either. This wasn't just some random big guy causing a scene. This wasn't another routine stop that would disappear into paperwork. This was a mistake that wouldn't go away no matter how many reports he filed or how many favors he called in. Slowly, with shaking hands, he lowered the gun and holstered it for the first time that morning. His movements became careful and aware, almost timid. I didn't know," he muttered, voice cracking like a teenager caught stealing. "Look, it was just procedure. No hard feelings, right? Apology." "Yeah, I'm sorry about that slap. Heat of the moment. You understand." Bud didn't argue. He didn't blow up in rage or throw the kind of tantrum that would have made headlines. He simply took what the moment could give and accepted what it couldn't with the same quiet dignity he had shown his whole life. "Apology accepted," he said quietly, rubbing his jaw one more time with a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes but carried no bitterness. "But next time, officer, pick on somebody your own size. Or better yet, don't pick on anybody at all. Mr. Rossi is a good man who's earned his peace. Leave him and his crate alone. That's all I ask." Then Bud moved. He turned and walked away with no rage, no big dramatic speech for the crowd, just that same powerful, easy stride that had brought him there in the first place. His shoulders stayed squared but relaxed, the kind of walk that said the giant had chosen mercy over mayhem even when every muscle in his body had wanted to swing. Behind him, North Beach eased back into its rhythm, but not the same rhythm as before. Vendors went back to work with a little more energy. Doors opened again. Voices filled the air louder, now with a mix of Italian and English because the story was already spreading like wildfire through the alleys. "Did you see that?" The big man held back. He could have destroyed that cop with one hand, but he didn't, because that's what North Beach did best. It kept going, kept living, kept breathing, not because nothing had happened, but because everything had happened in one perfect, unforgettable moment. The two children in the doorway stayed right where they were for a long time, watching the big man disappear down the street. They carried that moment with them without even realizing it would shape the way they saw strength for the rest of their lives. Mr. Giuseppe Rossi stayed seated on the wooden bench outside his shop, silent and steady, tears glistening in his old eyes that he tried to wipe away quickly because he had seen versions of this before, not the exact same scene, but the heavy weight of quiet power. As Bud passed him, their eyes met for a long, meaningful second, and in that single glance, everything was understood without a single extra word. No long speeches needed. Some truths sit too heavy for language anyway. The old man nodded once, deep and grateful from the bottom of his soul. Bud nodded back, simple and sincere, the way one neighbor nods to another. The street looked exactly the same on the surface as Bud Spencer disappeared into the morning light, the fog now completely burned away, the smell of espresso and fresh bread growing stronger, but it wasn't the same at all. Something had shifted deep down, not with noise or fists or dramatic Hollywood explosions, but permanently, quietly, powerfully. North Beach carried it forward, the way it carried everything else, quietly, completely, without ever setting it down or letting it fade. People would talk about it for weeks in the cafes and at family dinners, the day the movie star giant could have crushed a bully cop but chose restraint instead. The real story of that morning was never about the slap or the gun or even the famous name. It was about control, raw strength held in check by something bigger, and the quiet power of a big man who chose not to smash the moment to pieces, even when he had every reason and every ounce of muscle to do it. And that choice, more than any punch he ever threw on screen, or any race he ever swam in the Olympics, made it unforgettable. The kind of story that spread from block to block, from family dinner table to corner bar, until it felt like the whole city knew. Bud Spencer didn't need to fight to be a hero that day. He just needed to be himself, the gentle giant who knew exactly how strong he was, and chose to be better. Before you take this story as fact, I need to be clear with you, this is a fictional story. It didn't happen exactly like this, and Bud Spencer was not involved in an incident like the one you just heard. But the truth is, stories like this are written for a reason. They reflect something very real, the way people judge others by appearance, the way power can be misused, and the quiet strength it takes not to fight back when you easily could. This story isn't about one man or one moment. It's about a lesson. Real strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove itself. The strongest people in the room are often the ones who choose control over chaos, who walk away when they have every right to strike, and who protect others without needing recognition. We live in a world where it's easy to react, easy to get angry, easy to prove a point. But it takes something far greater to stay calm, to stay human, and to choose dignity when no one expects it. If this story made you think, even for a second, about respect, about judgment, about how we treat others, then it did its job. And if you believe the world needs more people like that, go ahead, hit like, leave a comment, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the stories that aren't real carry the most real lessons.